we think we can say no, but we don't say no. And why don't we say no? What is behind that? And that's when we talk about, you're on a team. Well, you don't want to let people down. Well, look we're short-staffed already. If I say no, it's going to be put on someone else's table. I don't want to look bad. This could be a career limiting decision if I say no. So there is a culture story about,
I don't have a choice.
Say no. What's that?
I don't have a choice. I have
to do what I'm told.
Right.
And I even say it's so deep that think about what happened when you were little, when you learned the word no. What happened to you? In some circumstances, you were punished. It is deep, deep, deep connection to why we don't say no. But in a request and a promise, or you talked about clarity, you can say yes, you can say no with good reason, and you can renegotiate. You know, it's always fascinates me in a good way, how our check-ins tie into what we ought to talk about. As I remember when I first was introduced to requests and promises, in the book that I read, Matthew Budd, You Are What You Say, which was given to me by, my mentor, Paul, and he dared me to read it, dared me. I didn't know him very well. I had half an hour with him when he dared me that. He gave me the book, threw it across the table, and he says, and I dare you to do the practices, not just read the book, but do the practices. And I feel like all our current situations tie into this, because the one thing that got my heart, because of who I was at that moment in my journey in my life, the requester, when you request something from someone else, whether it's to share information or your experience or something you need from them, you are inviting people to participate in your life. And when I read that sentence, I went, oh man, there it is. My vulnerability. I need to ask for something so I can have somebody in my life with me to do what needs to be done or take that next step. I was so used to being the tough nut and doing it on my own. So just the fear, just knowing that making a request, asking something of someone else, is allowing them to participate fully in your life. It just opened up, because I'm a recovering overcommitter, and I'm still in recovery. Wanting to do things for people, do things, do. And a lot of the time, I choose to do it on my own, which doesn't really end well in a lot of situations. Or it could be much better by being open to, it's maybe mine to do, but I don't have to do it by myself. Having others to help or be involved can really mobilize or create a condition of care, support, joy, success, community, family. It just opens up so much more when you include others in your life to participate. Which is really what we were talking about today, or accompanying people or being with people or being by ourselves. I love that.
And you say that characteristic about yourself, and immediately sparked the same with me. And then immediately my mind went to, and I'm sorry, Karen, I missed about maybe 20 seconds of what you were saying, because my little voice was like, it wasn't a little voice, it was a committee, it was busy in there. So wanting to commit, wanting to do this, wanting to not say no. And my mind immediately went to, why do I do that? And I know part of it is based on my deep value of wanting to be of service. Okay. And I honor that. There's a part of me that also recognizes that when I say yes, and I say, I'm with you guys because I said yes and I took the leap at one fateful day. it builds experience, and those build upon each other. And when the door opens, don't peek through, go. So those two things are there, but there, if I'm honest, there has to be a part of it that is, I want people to like me and not missing out. So FOMO, fear of missing out, and wanting people to like me, they are part of that. And that's part of the whole taking things personally aspect. So yes, bringing people in your life, those requests and promises, they have a far reaching. It's not like, oh, that's a request. Okay, you said yes, you said yes, and you said it's more than that. It's deeper than that. It has implications in our lives. When I say, could you do this? I would like your help with this. Would you consider this? It's more than just a request. It's more than just a content.
It's more than just the doing part.
Yeah.
I have a request. Can somebody prompt me with a question? Because I went so far into my check-in that I didn't come back out until, I don't know, partway through Mark's last spiel.
Do we want to do a setup piece of how action speaks louder than words? And then I will have a question for you, Ian.
That's perfect.
That help? Okay.
Yeah, that's great.
So this body of work that we're talking about, I started off by asking, how many of you believe actions speak louder than words? Put your hand up if that resonates with you, that feels, to be your truth. And majority of people will put their hand up. There'll be a couple that'll do one of these because they don't know what the right answer is, which I tell them there's no right or wrong answer. And then I ask, if we didn't have language, how would we make action happen? And so there's an understanding as we start to unravel that. So this assessment of actions, it's actually a generalization. Actions speak louder than words. It's something we've heard over and over again, and has an element of truth in it, because when you keep saying I'm going to do something as a recovering overcommitter, here's my story, and not doing it, well, how does that impact others? If you don't clearly communicate what you're going to do and why, and ask others to contribute or participate, that can look a little bit like you're a pushy person. Someone would say, like a bull in a china shop. Well, I had good intentions, but you didn't communicate it in a way that people could see your action as something they needed and wanted. So they're interdependent. We need our language. We need language to be able to make action happen, to be able to mobilize things that we care about, to invite people to participate fully and contribute in that situation. And there's 5 ways. So we learned this in the book, Matthew Budd, You Are What You Say, chapter 4. Fernanda Flores introduced this to one of the doctors that wrote this book. And there's 5 ways that we make action happen in language. And we covered the working with assessment, which is one of them, generalizations, declarations. And then today we're going to talk about requests and promises and demands. So there's 5 ways we make action happen in language. So building our capacity, understanding what that looks like, having practices that really help us do that in a way that supports yourself and the others that you're including in your life, whether it's at work or at home with your spouse or mobilizing it with young children. We are making requests and promises on a regular, continual basis, verbally. And in the new world day, obviously there's a lot of email connection, and especially in the virtual world, we even text our requests. I did one for Ian this morning. I made a request for Ian for today in a text. And so, that toing and froing for clarity was, we've learned how to build that capacity so that as the requester, I get what I need. And him as the promiser, he's able to contribute and meet the needs of my request. So we've got this way now that we do that. And I know I always go back to your time in, exploring this idea, this theory, Ian, what was that like for you as you were talking about, just as we start to grow forward, how did that impact you?
I think it just made me more conscious of the way that I make requests of other people. Because I'm not necessarily tied to a specific result that someone has to say yes when I ask them if they're available or can they do something. I'm more open to them saying no, or not now, or if not now, when. Like, so being more flexible with when something can take place, as opposed to it having to happen the moment that I make the request. I remember back in my government days, I would go in on weekends to catch up on stuff, and I would send out emails. And honestly, and I think I had already taken a little bit of the work with you on this, and I'm just doing it to get stuff off my plate. I'm not actually expecting a response, especially not until Monday, Tuesday, when they get around to reading their emails. And I would get emails, people replying to me on Saturdays and Sundays, because they feel like they need to respond right away. And so because I became more conscious of that, I would start to write in my emails, I know this is on a weekend. I know this is on your off time. This can wait. Like, this is me getting ahead of my workload. This is not to try to give you workload. So it's being conscious of my requests and knowing the habitual behavior of people, where they will instinctively want to be of service and answer. So it's had a big effect on me.
Yeah. So even the way you wrote, even being proactive, because that need to go in on the weekend was about you.
Yeah.
No, I'm not saying this in a negative. Like, I get this. For me to be present with my family, I need to go in today and do this so I can go home and be with my family. So there is a clear reason why you're doing this, but it's being aware of the ripple effect of what something is for you, and just letting people know this is not about you and needing this done quickly, and here's my expectations at your end. So just the not being clear about why you're doing it, what the request is, and when you need it by is so important. If you don't have that, our internal, and I'm going to go to you, Mark, because I think it ties into your two pieces, right? FOMO and the idea of not wanting to help people. Like, people are doing this with those two reasons. They don't want to be excluded if they don't get back to you. So what's your take, Mark?
Well, there's a take. The joys of doing this live. Listen, I can't help but go where I don't want to go, or where I've already been but don't want to go back. I've never been a perfectionist. That hasn't been in my DNA. Okay. But I've been around perfectionists, and it has affected me greatly. And there was one perfectionist who I had to work around, who got to a point where they realized that, and I'm saying what their learning was, that by them being that way, in some cases they may have been formulating their request clearly from a perfectionist standpoint, but in many cases they weren't. But the perfectionist was still there. So when the response wasn't what lived up to the perfectionist expectations, there were issues. But here's where it goes a little further. Here again, I'm talking logistics here. Okay, we're talking logistics, but at a deeper level, that perfectionist, now having seen a different light and learning to communicate differently, and learning the essence of that dynamic that I just explained, realize that they really didn't know the people around them, because the people around them, when they're around that person, were different because that person was being a perfectionist. And if they were or were not communicating clearly their requests and demands, then it was creating a way of being for us that wasn't normal, or not our normal, or that wasn't me. Honestly, I couldn't be me around that person. I had to be who they wanted me to be to get that perfectionist box ticked. But the other flip side of that too, not flip side, but complementary side, is we did not know that person either. So it creates that barrier. And you could still be perfectionist. And if you have that 100% clarity all the time and everybody knows where you stand, well, maybe we can live with that. But when that ambiguity kicks in, and guess what? It does kick in. And here comes one of my favorite sayings. Nothing has a meaning until you give it a meaning. Nothing has a meaning until you give it a meaning. So he has a meaning. I have a meaning. And that interaction is messy, to use one of our common words. That probably speaks to the clarity between requests, promises, and demands. But not only the clarity, but our way of being in them, which is even a deeper level than just the clarity, more than just the logistics. You can have the clearest communication message you want. Your way of being with it could be an issue.
Now, is that level of being, does it have something to do with what you feel you can and can't do with regard to that request?
Logistically, yes, but there's also the element of expectations, and that whole element of taking it personally. What if I don't live up to the expectations attached to that request? What if I can't deliver? How are they going to think of me? Not only does that affect my way of being, it affects the performance too. I'm not being in my 100%. I'm doing the task, and I'm more worried about what you're going to think of it than the actual task. So it can affect the actual task as well.
So that may speak to an unexpressed level of expectation as part of the request. What am I expecting of you? When am I expecting that of you? And what's the level of the quality of the workmanship that comes along with that?
And I know Kieran's going to say the absence of that, the absence or presence of that clarifying discussion.
Yeah, and I think it's, you talk about going a little bit deeper, and I like that idea. And I ask again this question: how many of you think you can say no to your boss anytime, like with a good explanation? And many people will put their hand up. And then I'll ask the managers, how many of you believe that it's safe and comfortable for your staff to say no to you on certain requests with good expectations, explanations? And they'll have their hand up as fast as it can go. And then I talk about work-life balance. How many of you find your plates full? There's just so much coming at you now that it's hard to keep up. The workloads are exploding with virtuality, emails, just everything that's going on right now in our cultures, and everybody puts their hand up. And then I say, we think we can say no, but we don't say no. And why don't we say no? What is behind that? And that's when we talk about, you're on a team. Well, you don't want to let people down. Well, look we're short-staffed already. If I say no, it's going to be put on someone else's table. I don't want to look bad. This could be a career limiting decision if I say no. So there is a culture story about,
I don't have a choice.
Say no. What's that?
I don't have a choice. I have
don't
to do
have
what
a
I'm
choice.
told.
Right.
And I even say it's so deep that think about what happened when you were little, when you learned the word no. What happened to you? In some circumstances, you were punished. It is deep, deep, deep connection to why we don't say no. But in a request and a promise, and you talked about clarity, you can say yes, you can say no with good reason, and you can renegotiate. And I just want to build on what you were saying about the perfectionist and about what that felt like for you is this capacity and the art of renegotiating, being able to sit down when the requester and the promisor are together on this very important file and saying, okay, here's what's going on. Here's the big picture for me. What do I need to let go of? What's okay to pause for a few days? Is this more important than that? Or I can do this part because I really don't know the rest of that. Like this ability to get clarity and make sure this request is going to be fulfilled in the best possible way. So the front loading of that conversation, that's a relationship conversation.
Mhm.
That's a possibility conversation. So when you get to action, you actually move faster because it's clear. It's, that's no big deal. Park that for now. And so you walk away with less feeling of I'm letting people down. And people say that was really, really good. And I worked for an ADM who learned this process. And he used to say to me, come to me with your best solution, not the one I'm going to say yes to. We can renegotiate that. So he taught me the whole power of don't bring me what you think I'll say yes to. Bring me what you believe is the best possible scenario solution. And let's have a great conversation and renegotiate and come out with something that's really going to help us both win. It was amazing for me to learn and be with him in a very, very big file that was high profile and practice that with him. So I built some capacity, and this was part of my unlearning of being an overcommitter, because I didn't want to miss out, and I don't like to let people down, but I was letting people down because at the end of the day, I could not fulfill all the promises I made. And I was having a negative impact on certain relationships. And typically the ones that I wouldn't fulfill in a timely manner were the ones that were my people I had the strongest relationship with, because I knew they'd forgive me. But then it got to the point where my reputation was being impacted. It took getting to that and this learning for me to stop the cycle. I still get back on the overcommitting hamster wheel. I still do it because it's strong in me. But I notice when I'm on it and I can see how it's impacting others. And I get off and say, okay, time to sit down and look at your list and have some important conversations with these people that matter to me. It was a huge muscle development for me, Ian.
I mean, that literally happened with the scheduling of this call. So we were supposed to do this last Monday. I think, Karen, then you realized that you were on babysitting duty that day, grandma duty, and I couldn't do it. So then you asked if we could switch it, but it was not clear when that could happen. There was some text back and forth, but I don't know. I don't know if I was clear on what we had agreed on. And then when it ended up being on Tuesday morning, my day was already full. But I'm like, I got to get it in there. It's important to do. But I hadn't even thought through myself, how is this going to affect the rest of my day and whatever. I mean, that same morning, I had my son had this, he was getting picked up by the fire department, and he was going to do this whole thing that day. And I was trying to cram in something that wasn't going to really fit the schedule that well. So I made a request that we switch it up for another time, but it was through text that we were trying to do this, and having text conversation with one person is one thing. Having a text conversation with two people who have different schedules and different things going on. Anyways, the art of renegotiating that would have probably helped out initially right away. And even if I had just thought about it, even if we recorded it the minute before I had to hop in the car and drive the kids 7 hours, I'm not going to edit it for a week. So why should we cram it in there? So if I was more present and conscious with what my schedule was going to look like and how it was going to affect me, I definitely would have asked for a clear renegotiation of timing and push it to today, whatever. But that didn't happen. And then things just got kind of messy in my head. Well, what are they thinking? And are they going to be upset with me that I didn't renegotiate this earlier, or whatever the case may be. So this stuff happens even to those who are more conscious of its relevance to their day-to-day lives. So, and if you can't renegotiate with the people who you're closest with, are you going to be able to do that with your immediate supervisor or manager who is who you're trying to impress and make sure that you're, the go-getter, and you always say yes, and you're going to get it done no matter what. And it just makes things worse.
At least we got the time straight where we don't even debate whether it's Atlantic time or Eastern time anymore. We got that clarity down.
I still double check that one because I'm like, is he really sure? I don't know if you really know.
Are you sure
his time?
Mark understood it was Eastern time and not Atlantic time?
But there's a really good example. Like
But for
their
Mark,
specificity is super duper important. And we all, I remember this so clearly when I started to learn this. I have two children at that time. I think they're 8 and 5, and I'd washed their comforters on the line, hung them on the line so they smelled really good. And I came in and we were going out for the whole afternoon. It was going to be a fire, and I knew we were going to get home late. So I said to both kids, I made it. The request was to them face to face. I want you to take those comforters, put them on your bed, because we're going to get home late and you just want to crawl into bed and go to sleep. Can you do that for me? Yeah, I can do that, Mom. So I don't know, half hour later, I'm walking by their rooms and I look in Jenna's room and my perfectionist Mark. And she's got the comforter on, it's all tucked in. She's gone one step further. She's actually turned the sheets and the comforter back so she can literally crawl into bed when she gets home. I go by Cole's room and it's in a ball on the bed. So that request was the same, but the listener, and in my mind, I just wanted it, I didn't care if I had the sheet roll back, but I wanted them to have it tucked on the bed so they could. So this request, Cole, and this was Cole's way. So understanding what do people need at the other end to be successful, like thinking that one way is going to get you the outcome. Because as a requester, it's my responsibility. That was a big unlearning for me, to ensure that the promiser has what they need to be successful. So with Cole, I needed to say to him, Cole, buddy, that just means like lay it down on your bed, maybe tuck it in at the end. Like he would have needed a little more instruction, because my intention was I just wanted them to be able to go in. I wouldn't have to do anything for them. Didn't put that specificity into that. And so I learned, that was such a great learning for me as a manager, with managing different employees. Some of them needed like very little detail. Like, give me a quick 5 points in the email, I'm good to go. Karen got it clear. There were other ones that needed to, I needed to go face to face with them and make sure we had a clear conversation so that they could be successful and we were clear on what needed to get done. So huge learning for me on people's learning styles, and that could tie into auditory learning, visual learning, and just what people need to be able to mobilize themselves into action. So it isn't, what I learned is it wasn't cookie cutter approach. And so many times in meetings, when I was the facilitator and facilitating action planning and whatever we were doing with the team, and then this senior manager would come in and do an opening remarks, and then they'd leave, and I'd say, how many of you understood what was asked? What was there any questions? Because I used to ask him to stand out in the hallway. They go, I don't know what that means. And I said, okay, sit down. What are your 5 questions? And I used to say, like, the senior management team used to always say, I thought I was clear. I said, you were as clear as you could be without the requester getting the toing and froing. So all of my design work started to be around, okay, they're going to do a 10-minute laying it down, then he's going to leave, and then you're going to come back, and then we're going to really make sure we have all the questions answered so that when you go into the action planning, you're not guessing what that senior leader wanted. And it wasn't that they were bad people or weren't smart, just this way of talking to the hierarchy. And I remember at a session when I was teaching this to ADMs, this one guy, one ADM, he went like this, oh my goodness, I've been an assistant deputy minister for 10 years, and this is embarrassing to say, but it's so good that I know this. No one in my group that I've worked with and they've worked for me has ever said no to me. He goes, that's scaring me right now. That is concerning me right now. And he was known as a really, really great leader. So he had a lot of fault, but he had never, he says, no one's challenging me. No one's saying no. I have some work to do. I have some conversations to have with my team when I go back, because we need to have that capacity to say no and renegotiate. It was a really big aha for him. And I venture to guess that that's still quite prevalent in structures with hierarchy. How do we do that in a way that it's seen as a important conversation and an important way to engage with each other? I'm curious what you had to think about that. And Mark, I'm going to ask you first, as you are still in that hierarchy and part of that hierarchy too.
I'm going to answer that. First, I'm going to say I am one of those people who says, okay, yes, yes, yes. I'm one of those people who you give them instructions, and before you finish instructions, I'm up the door. I'm going. It's like, okay, I'm doing it. And that has consequences. It has consequences at work. I have consequences in my house too, because I'll say yes to everything. And then here's what happens. Okay. This is what happens. And squirrely pops up. And all of a sudden there's a squirrel factor becomes really high and things don't happen. And so why didn't I do that? I don't know why I didn't do that. I really don't know. I forgot. So wanting to please everybody and wanting to has its consequences, just like the perfectionist and just like the multitasker. So to answer your question, last week, I got a request, and I have to tell you that culture-wise, very often when you get in government still, when senior management says sit, some people don't even look if there's a chair. And so that when the briefing note request comes in, there is no question. You're dropping everything you're doing and you're doing the briefing note. And last week, that just wasn't possible. My workload is such right now that I'm doing the work of 3 people, literally, not figuratively. And I just couldn't do it. And the briefing note had to be done because there were consequences. And I felt that I was going to push back. But I did offer, I said, I'm not doing a briefing note. That's going to take not doing it. I'm going to give a call to that senior management person, brief them, give them what they need. It'll take 30 seconds. No briefing note. It was met with what? Well, yeah, and a lot of pushback, and caused them to reformulate the request in a different way with added justification. And I pushed back again. And finally, I said, humor me, give me 30 seconds. I'll make the call. If we still require a briefing note, then I'll do the briefing note. Guess what? It didn't. It didn't. It was called. It was actually appreciated. Well, thank you for the quick response. If you would have done the briefing note, we would have gotten in 2 days. So had I not felt that I could have that conversation, had that conversation not being held for clarity between the request and accepting and the expectations, we wouldn't have got to where we were. I'm going to conclude with a comment, because an observation. As I've been part of some of the hiring practices in government, it's come to my attention that 2 of the things that used to be considered an asset or a best quality, that question, what's your biggest quality and tell us about it? A lot of those that used to come up were two things, and they still up to recently are still coming up. I'm a perfectionist. I get things done well. That used to come up quite a bit. And I'm a multitasker. But I think those 2 things, I think we're getting to a point where we're getting a level of awareness that those 2 things are not necessarily sought out things. And proactively, I can tell you that in federal government, they're not. We don't want perfectionists and we don't want multitasker. And if either one of those will take you, but you're going to learn to tame these, because expecting this level from everybody, not sustainable. Saying yes to everything and multitasking, not sustainable. Plus, it leads to a whole bunch of confusion, errors, miscommunications, false expectations, false deliveries. Those ways of being are not conducive to that exchange. And I think that's probably what those 2 things have in common. When those 2 ways of being are present, it torts that communication back and forth for clarity that we need. Even it definitely affects the relationship, definitely affects possibilities, because that's not happening, and it affects the quality of the actions. So I think we're getting there, but I don't think we're there yet. But we're starting to realize that there's some issues, whether consciously or unconsciously, I'm not sure. But
on a tangent, I mean, those are buzzwords that we've learned that are okay to use in interviews, right? And people have an assessment as to what they mean. So I think people just spit them out because that's the accepted one that I use. And if my word that I use, my assessment of myself, matches the idea that you want for that position, well, then great, then you hit the check mark for that. But I think it's in the conversation that you have with one another that you clarify what those things really mean, and if those things are an asset or not. So I think it's in that clarification conversation that's so important in the request and promising contract that you're making, because that's the conversation that has to happen in order for any of this to make sense and to work. Otherwise, you're running off and doing things before you're ready, and you're making assumptions on what's required. Yeah, sure. And it's not supporting the end result. So the thought that I was having when Karen asked her question was, I was thinking, oh, well, your manager, your leader has to practice this first, has to tell you, has to give you the opportunity to ask and to get clarity. But then as I'm thinking, I'm like, that's not realistic, because they have to know that that's actually an issue or a problem. So it's the whole concept of acting from where you are. You can practice this stuff on your own. You can practice it with your kids. You can practice it with your staff. You can practice it from where you sit. So knowing that people will likely always say yes, or is making sure that's really okay. Is this going to affect your schedule? So ask a few more probing questions. That is this going to impact the other work that I've asked you to do? So you can get clarity with them. And it gives them permission, by you leading and asking the question, for them to say yes or no, or, oh, maybe there is a few more things than I'm really capable of producing right now. How can we switch things around for you? Maybe I'll let task B and C slide for a bit while we handle the one that I said is so urgent today. So leading from where you are, and then being open to somebody saying no. And being open to renegotiate, or even offer the renegotiation in advance to give them permission. And to ensure they have clarity on what they're promising to begin with.
I totally agree that we think we're waiting for the leader to get it right. And I think that's dangerous. I'm having a moment here, because so often, and I've done it now this last few times, because so much is now by email and text in the workplace, is I will say, can I have 5 minutes of your time on the phone, not in an MS Teams? And I come prepared now, because it's a toing and froing, and I'm getting that call. And something I've learned about my promise, because that's a promise, 5 minutes on the phone, and I time myself, because their time is precious, and I'm ready and prepared, and I don't need to have, so I can go in and say, I just have these 2 things I need to get clarified, and quick, thanks, I'm good. Have a good day. If they want to continue the conversation, that's up to them, but I've got what I've needed. I don't dilly-dally. I don't even know if I don't know where I got that saying from. Around, I'm there to get so we have a successful outcome. And I find people will say yes to that more often, because they know you're not going to have them on the phone longer than that 5 minutes. Same thing when I was face-to-face in the room. Can I pick your brain and I would really be rigorous on my time. And I would be prepared. So we can teach people these things. But I'm just having an aha moment that we've gotten away from the phone. And often, Ian and I have started to do that. I'll say, he says, yeah, can I just call you? And so there's some good in that using that as a way to communicate as well, because we're missing the oraling of the toing and froing back and forth. Email just doesn't do it quite the same, or texting.
How many times do you send me a text and like, What
You call me.
happens? What happens 10 seconds after?
I know that. And I love that. And we get her done. The other thing I want to talk about though, just to, because putting the rounding this up about the demands, because there's requests and promises and there's demands. And in life, there will be times where no renegotiation isn't really an option. And some of them you just know they're not. And so, that's where you're going to, find a way to make that happen, whether it's at home or work, and that's, you need to know what they are. What we have to be very mindful of is we don't treat every request as a demand. And sometimes that's just noticing, when you get something and there's urgent tags on it with no deadlines. So just really making sure you get some clarity, even on a demand. Like, is this something that's, because they can where is renegotiation possible? And where is it not? And I would say renegotiation is probably possible in a lot that we don't know. And I've really learned that even at home, just at home, I would live with a perfectionist. So just talking about, does that need to be done right now? Like, I know it's on your demand list. Let's sit down. Your demand list is getting really big today, and it isn't always on me. Sometimes the demand list is on him. So like, walking him through that list and saying, yeah, that's okay. We can do that there, and helping that list become more, okay, here's the essence of what needs to get done right now. That has a time limit and should have a time limit on it. So learning that as well.
We've discovered notes on their iPhone where you can copy a note and then share it. And so our to-do list is now on notes. So either of us can add to it. So it stays there so that I don't forget things. See how I own that one?
Yeah, I agree. So I remember Paul saying when he introduced this, he said, if we could get super competent and confident in requests and promises and that whole ebbing and flowing back, he believed that we could deal with work-life balance, that we would have that, I'm going to use your famous word, Mark, a little more control, instead of it being chaotic and feeling like it's just overwhelming at times, that we would have work-life balance. Because having clarity, being able to say no, making sure the requester, the promiser has what they need to be successful, making sure your conditions of satisfaction are clear for yourself, so you don't get something and then you're not happy. So it was huge for me, and it's been a health saving practice for me to keep myself in check on that. And I know it has made my relationships more stronger, and we can say no, and learning to forgive each other when we don't fulfill our promises. Like, I guess I would say owning that and apologizing for that.
We've
And I
talked
think, sorry, I just want to quickly
go ahead.
Something. But I think, Karen, that speaks to your commitment to the process. So if I say it's going to be 5 minutes, that's my commitment to you. And because I'm going to say more often than not, that is what you stick to. I mean, almost every workshop we've ever done, well, we've committed to this is 1 hour and we're coming down to our last 2 minutes. We've had to cut our stuff short to make sure that happens in our minds. But we honor the time that you've given, and we promised you that this was going to be the case. This is 1 hour or 5 minutes, because you are so consistent with that core value. People know that their time isn't going to be robbed from them, that time meant something. You had a purpose, you got that purpose through. And if we're going to run over, maybe we'll reschedule something for another time to catch up on those things. But you're so clear with that, it builds that rapport, it builds that relationship, it builds that trust with you, that she honors what she says, she fulfills her promises, and that's that. And in doing so, you're teaching other people that model works and that trust is there. and the relationship can be built. Sorry, Mark.
I'm sorry. I'm not going to forget it because I think it'd be fair to say that we've been over requests and promises over 100 times, and maybe even close to that together. And your comment for just now on clarity and control has given me this aha moment at this time, even though I've heard this and preached this, lack of a better term, hundreds of times. That importance around communication, around requests and promises and demands, is not about logistics. It's not only about logistics. It's about that clarity and control. I love those two C's. It's about that clarity and control, and both of those are important. It just, for me, it's my aha moment on this day, because I've never seen it to that level of implication. Like, oh yeah, I got clear requests, yes, clear promises, okay, yes, I get it. It's more than logistics.
And that clarity and control will give you confidence and competence to produce.
I think we need a visual on that.
I like that.
We need
Well,
a
I
visual.
don't think I've heard it that way either. Like, you just brought it together, Mark. So thank you for doing that, because those two pieces, clarity actually feeds control. It's a partner. It's because we see control sometimes as a bad word, where this really has a great vibration of success for everyone, including the actual deliverable.
It can be seen as a bad word, but think about this. Think about every single coaching conversation you've had. Most of those, again, I'm going well in my generalizations today, but most of those have to do with somebody's either real or perception on the lack of control they have on a specific part of their life. Whether it's real or not, there's a control, a feeling that you don't have complete control. Otherwise, you've probably already done something about it. So that control is important at this level as well. I'm so glad we're recording this.
I'll send you a clip. Mark.
I love doing a visual on that too. That could be very helpful as to the why, because I found requests and promises in our work sometimes gets pushed to the side, right? We have the 6-pack for the questions, and this is really interesting about the request and promise process, about how we make action happen and how it fits in the conversation and the why of what clarity opens up and what it does when we get down to action. The steering wheel of the requester and the promisers, they all have a hold of that and a bit of control over where it's going. So I love that idea.
I'm good. Are you good?
I'm good, but I'm way better than I was when I started this conversation.
All right.
All right.
We'll see you next time on Coaching, Coffee, and Conversation. Take care, everybody.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.